A pirate ship wasn't just a ship. It was a floating business. It had payroll, it had investors, it had operating costs, brutal risk, and one very dangerous problem. Every single voyage could end with a fortune or with absolutely nothing. So how did this actually work? Who paid for the ship in the first place? What did it cost to keep it running? Where did the money really come from? And how did a crew of criminals decide who got paid what? Why would anyone gamble their life for a share? And what happened when a voyage came back empty? Somehow, a gang of outlaws built something that looked shockingly similar to a modern startup. And once you see how the money was divided, you may never look at pirates the same way again. Let's start with the strangest idea in this whole story. A pirate ship can be read like a company balance sheet. Now, to be clear, pirates during the golden age of piracy, roughly the 1650s through the 1720s, would not have used the word startup. They weren't filing paperwork or pitching investors over coffee, but strip away the black flags and the legends, and the underlying structure is familiar. Think about it this way. The ship itself was the main asset, the single most valuable thing the operation owned. The captain was the operational leader, the person making the big calls. The crew were the workers. Navigation skill, local knowledge, and good intelligence about which routes carried the richest cargo, that was competitive advantage. Cannons and muskets? Those were capital equipment, expensive tools that made the whole business possible. And here's where it gets very businesslike. Food, fresh water, gunpowder, spare sails, repairs. Those were operating expenses. They drained away. Whether or not the crew ever captured a thing, captured cargo was revenue and risk. Risk was the central problem the entire enterprise was built around. Here's the part people miss. A pirate ship couldn't just sit still and wait for a good opportunity. The moment it left port, the clock started ticking. Every day at sea burned through supplies, wore down the rigging, and put more strain on a crew that still had to be fed. There was no guaranteed income, but the costs never paused. That's an enormous amount of pressure, and it shaped nearly every decision a captain made. But before a pirate could chase treasure, someone had to pay for the machine that made the chase possible. So how did you actually get a pirate ship? Here's the first surprise. Most pirates didn't buy their flagship the way you'd buy a used car. A huge number of pirate vessels were captured, taken from merchants, upgraded, and pressed into service. Sometimes a crew started with a small, fast sloop and worked their way up to something bigger and more dangerous, trading up like a founder, reinvesting profits into better equipment. But free ships were never really free. Because the second you owned one, the bills started. A working vessel needed constant repair. Wooden hulls rotted and leaked, ropes frayed, sails tore in storms and had to be patched or replaced. Ships had to be careened, dragged ashore, and scraped clean of the weeds and shipworms that slowed them down. And a slow pirate ship was a dead pirate ship. Then add navigation equipment, gunpowder, and shot for the cannons, muskets, tools, medical supplies, and above all, food and fresh water for a crew that could number anywhere from a dozen to well over 100. Now, I need to be honest with you about numbers here. Exact costs are genuinely hard to pin down. They varied enormously by the size of the vessel, the region, the decade, and the circumstances. Anyone who gives you one precise price tag for a pirate ship is guessing. So let's not fake it. Instead, let's think about it as a flow. The same way you'd sketch out a business plan. You start with some capital, that gets you the ship. The ship demands a crew, the crew needs supplies, the mission needs weapons. Keeping all of it running is your operating cost. Then comes the voyage, and only at the very end, if you're lucky, the payoff. Notice what that structure tells you. Almost all the spending comes first, the reward comes last, and it's never promised. That's not a treasure hunt. That's a high-risk investment, and investments need people willing to work for them. So how exactly did you pay a pirate. Here's where the pirate business model gets genuinely radical for its time. On a legitimate merchant or navy ship in this era, most sailors earned wages, a fixed amount, paid whether the voyage made money or not. Predictable, modest, safe-ish. Pirates flipped that. Many pirate crews weren't paid wages at all. They were paid in shares of whatever they captured. No plunder, no pay. If the voyage failed, a lot of them walked away with nothing. And this is documented in something remarkable: pirate articles. These were written agreements that crews signed before setting out, spelling out the rules and, crucially, exactly how loot would be divided. A number of these articles survive in historical accounts, though I'll add a fair warning. Many come to us through an 18th century book called A General History of the Pirates, and historians debate how much of that book is reliable reporting versus embellishment. So treat the specifics as strong tradition rather than audited fact. Still, the pattern that shows up again and again is telling. An ordinary crew member typically got one share. The captain often got a bit more, maybe 1.5 or 2 shares. The quartermaster, who represented the crew's interests, and other key specialists could also earn extra. Skilled roles, the carpenter, the surgeon, the gunner, were valued because they kept the operation alive and fighting. Compare that to a merchant ship where a captain might earn many times what a common sailor made. Pirate pay was flatter, and the crew had a real say. That wasn't idealism, it was incentive design. When everyone shares in the upside, everyone has a reason to fight hard, take the ship, and protect the prize. There's even evidence, in some articles, of something like early workers' compensation, set payouts for losing an arm, a leg, or an eye in battle. The figures quoted vary and their reliability is debated, but the idea is striking. A rough insurance policy, written into the contract in a world where no government would ever cover an outlaw. So, why would anyone accept this? A steady sailor's wage was safer. A pirate's share could be far, far bigger, but the risk was enormous. This wasn't a guaranteed paycheck. It was closer to an extreme performance-based compensation system. High risk, high potential reward, and no floor beneath you. Which brings us to the moment everything was built around: the capture itself. Picture the payoff moment. A merchant ship on the horizon, the chase, the threat, the surrender. Now everybody just grabs gold and sails home rich, right? Not even close. And this is where the economics get genuinely interesting. Capturing a ship kicked off a whole process. First, secure the vessel, control the crew, make sure there's no counterattack. Then assess the cargo. And here's a reality that breaks the fantasy. Most captured cargo was not chests of gold coins, it was goods, sugar, tobacco, cloth, spices, timber, tools, sometimes enslaved people. A grim and real part of this history that we shouldn't gloss over. Valuable, yes, but not spendable. You can't pay a crew in barrels of sugar. So the loot had to be sorted, valued, and eventually turned into money, which meant finding buyers willing to purchase stolen goods, often at a steep discount in ports and hidden markets that would look the other way. Only then could the crew calculate shares, deduct any agreed costs, and divide what remained. And that gap between what you seized and what you actually pocketed is the single most important lesson in this entire story. Revenue is not profit. Say that again, because it's the idea that separates a real business from a fantasy. A huge, dramatic haul could still leave the crew with disappointing returns. How? The ship might have taken heavy damage in the fight and need expensive repairs. Supplies might be nearly gone, forcing costly restocking. The crew might have suffered casualties, and dead men's shares had to be handled. The cargo might be hard to sell, or sell only for a fraction of its value. Authorities might seize goods before they could be fenced. every one of those chips away at the top line number until the real profit is a shadow of the treasure. A captured fortune, in other words, could quietly become a modest payday. And the person responsible for navigating all of that? That was the captain, and his job was nothing like the movies. We picture the pirate captain as a tyrant barking orders from the deck. The reality was closer to a startup CEO under extreme pressure, and often with far less power than you'd expect. Because on many pirate ships, the captain didn't have absolute authority. In battle or a chase, yes, his word was law. You can't run a fight by committee, but major decisions and control of the loot frequently ran through the quartermaster and the crew. A captain who forgot that could lose everything, including his position. So what did the job actually involve in business terms? Choosing targets. Which ships were worth the risk and which were traps? Managing risk, reading the odds, the weather, the enemy's strength, timing, knowing when to strike and, just as critically, when to run, keeping morale up because a resentful crew is a dangerous crew, managing supplies so the operation didn't starve before it scored, negotiating surrenders, protecting the ship, and making strategic calls where one wrong choice could sink the whole venture. Every one of those is an economic decision. Attack the wrong ship, and you spend gunpowder, risk lives, and gain little. Chase a prize too far, and you burn through supplies you can't replace. Push the crew too hard, and morale collapses. Good leadership compounded value. Bad leadership destroyed it, sometimes in a single afternoon. And then there was one cost no accounting spreadsheet could fully predict. A risk that lived inside the operation itself. A risk with a name. Mutiny is usually told as a dramatic betrayal, but look closer and it's something more revealing. An organizational failure, a breakdown between leadership and labor, and pirate ships were unusually exposed to it. Think about the ingredients: rewards that felt unfair, a captain making bad calls, a string of failed voyages with nothing to show for the danger, disputes over how loot got divided, punishment that felt excessive, and underneath all of it, a slow erosion of trust. Now remember how these crews were structured. They'd signed articles. Many had a say in decisions. The captain often held his position by the crew's consent, and what the crew gave, the crew could take away. If enough men decided leadership was failing them, they could remove a captain, or worse. That threat was always in the room, so legitimacy wasn't a nice to have. It was survival. A captain needed the crew to believe the operation was fair and the decisions were sound. Lose that belief and it didn't matter how good your navigation was. Here's the comparison that makes it land. A modern company can survive a bad quarter. It has cash reserves, contracts, patient investors, time to recover. A pirate crew might not survive a single bad decision. There was no cushion, no second round of funding, no board meeting to smooth things over. The margin for error was razor thin, and everyone on board knew it. That fragility is exactly why we should stop thinking of a pirate voyage as an adventure and start thinking of it as an investment, a very particular kind. Let's bring it all together into one clean model. Capitalize the ship and the weapons, plus labor, the crew, plus operating cost, or the food, water, powder and repairs, plus risk, the ever-present chance of disaster. All of that adds up to one thing, a potential payoff. Not a guaranteed one, a potential one. And here's the economic principle that so many people get wrong, even today. High risk does not automatically mean high reward. Risk means the range of outcomes is wide, and some of those outcomes are terrible. A single pirate voyage could land almost anywhere on that range. It could produce massive returns, what would the rare, legendary score. It could produce moderate return, or enough to keep going. It could produce almost nothing, a season of danger for pocket change. Or it could produce catastrophic loss in the ship taken or sunk, the crew captured or killed. Same business model, wildly different endings. Let's make it concrete. And I want to be crystal clear that this next example is hypothetical, built to show the logic, not a record of a real voyage. Imagine a crew captures a cargo they believe is worth a large sum, feels like a triumph. But then they can only sell it at a discount to a buyer who knows they're desperate. The fight damaged the ship, so repairs eat into the total. Supplies have to be replaced. Injured men are owed their agreed compensation. Shares are divided across a big crew. By the end, that large sum has shrunk dramatically, and every man's cut is far smaller than the number that first got their hearts pounding. That gap between the dream and the deposit is uncertainty. And uncertainty, more than greed, is what drove pirate decision-making. Every target, every chase, every choice to fight or flee. Because eventually the odds themselves began to turn. If this model could deliver fortunes, why did the golden age of piracy end? The short answer: the environment changed and the model couldn't survive it. Start with enforcement. Navies, the British Royal Navy chief among them, grew larger, better organized and far more aggressive about hunting pirates down. Governments that had once tolerated or quietly benefited from piracy turned hard against it. In the Caribbean, colonial authorities launched pardons to lure pirates out of the trade, then pursued those who refused. Famous figures fell fast in this period. Blackbeard was killed in 1718. Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates of the era, was killed in 1722. The message was unmistakable. Now think about what that did to the economics. Every one of those changes raised the cost of doing business and lowered the payoff. The risk of capture and execution climbed. Safe ports where you could sell stolen goods dried up. Merchant vessels grew more cautious and better protected. Trade patterns shifted. The rich, easy targets became fewer and more dangerous to hit. So flip it around into the founder's math. The expected reward was shrinking. The expected cost, including the very real cost of your own life, was rising. When the downside grows and the upside collapses, the venture stops making sense. New recruits stopped signing on. Crews broke up. The model didn't get outlawed into oblivion so much as it got priced out of existence. And that's the larger lesson hiding inside the whole story. A business model is only profitable while its environment allows it to be. When the cost of operating rises and the opportunity disappears, even a model that once minted fortunes will collapse. It's true for pirates. It's true for entire industries today. So let's go back to where we started. How did pirates make money? The lazy answer is they stole treasure. But you know better now. The real answer is far more sophisticated and far more familiar. It was capital, the ship, and the weapons someone had to fund. It was labor, a crew paid in shares, not certainty. It was risk, priced into every decision. It was incentives, written into signed articles. It was leadership that could create value or destroy it overnight. It was operating costs that never stopped. It was revenue that had to be turned into real profit. And the constant, brutal gap between the two. And above all, it was uncertainty. Because beneath the treasure maps and black flags was something surprisingly familiar. A business built around risk, reward, and the brutal mathematics of survival. If you enjoyed this kind of hidden economic history, subscribe to Mr. Economics, because history becomes a lot more interesting when you follow the money.